Please, you are also a designer, not only an architect. So you are thinking about more about interior. So we just heard Uldis's example. When you are, for example, drawing a building, you have to think already about a button, not to mislead me, but help you. So there are so many things when designing a building. In what part of your checklist you are applying universal design? For example, if you are foreseeing a glass wall, why should you draw something on them to help people with visual impairments not to bump into the door? So at what stage? So
Un līdz ar ko
I am not only a designer, but also an architect, and in a practical life and theory, I work with those issues and I read those things more about architecture than design. And those issues have been topical not only some time before, but also now. So we are thinking from a wide angle at the subjects, objects, and the spaces. And when I speak about architecture, I never separate it from the urban environment or make some specific categories. And of course, inclusive environment and convenient environment is a very important question, but I don't look at it just black and white, like to have some kind of things or yes or no, but from the point of design, there is a lot to speak and also discuss about this universal design. So can I start? Yes. So like in the previous presentations you already heard, architects quite often accept these accessibility issues as regulatory burden, which has to be taken into account in order to be able to get your project approved. And that's it. But in addition to this, there is also division in the public between normal people and those who follow this sign. And in all this context, most of us tend to forget that there is very multifaceted each of those groups. So people with disabilities, we cannot say that there are two groups, people with disability and people without. All of us, we are so diverse, with such diverse experiences, with such diverse feelings in environment. And of course we can understand it, because basically in the history of architecture we have had a lot of attempts to standardize us. For example, you know this Leonardo da Vinci painting, drawing, which is based on Vitruvius' articles. And he developed it measuring the bodies of men, and he was trying to define dimensions of a person and try to understand how is the person moving along the spaces. And the next stage is the 20th century, when Le Corbusier, one of the well-known architects, was also trying to standardize the human, and he created the modular system, and he had measured the body of a person. He was trying to understand how much space is taken when a person is sitting, when is standing, when has stretched out a hand, and so on. And if we look carefully at previous drawing and this drawing, then we can see this height is 1 meter 83, and this is quite a muscular man. And we actually already see that a large part of the society do not fit with this description. I would say even the largest part of the public. And we are not talking about people with special needs, but people with very simple daily needs. So if we look at this issue in the at such categories, and of course I am speaking about this with irony. But considering our time limitations, I would like to show you a couple of projects where people have accessed this process totally differently. Talking about inclusivity of the environment. So one of the iconic examples is the project which was made in the 90s in the Netherlands. Remco has project Villa Bordeaux, close to the French city Bordeaux, very exclusive architecture. And here is a very interesting feature. And why I said this is interesting because of environmental accessibility. This is not because only very expressive architecture, but this is also created for a person who is on a wheelchair. So the owner of the house after the accident got in a wheelchair, and he understood he wouldn't feel comfortable in his city apartment, and so he ordered this world-renowned architect to design a house for him. And he said, I don't want to have a simple house, I want to have a complex and complicated house because it will define my world. And here you can see the platform is the central element, and it moves around 3 floors, and it gets the owner to all the 3 floors. So you might at first think that let's create one level house and that's it. But no, he was thinking, let us create house with 3 floors, which make the owner feel great, and he can move around the floors. Another project I chose from the same architect office. Like it was said in the previous presentations, we are not only talking about physical accessibility, we are also talking about emotional accessibility. And if you look at this one, it is actually a medical facilities. This building is within the hospital complex. This is a MEGI center. MEGI is an organization that has a network of centers in the UK, and they provide psychological support to the cancer patients and their families. And she herself also was a cancer patient, and unfortunately she died before the opening of the first center. But from the very beginning she considered that in architecture we also need to include this well-being, because she herself had experienced announcement of this diagnosis in these white, sterile hospital rooms, and then in this hallway, dark hallway, she had to rethink what was said to her. And since this time, for each of those centers, the world-renowned architect or architectural office was involved, and they created centers for people to return, to meet, to receive psychological support from professionals, and also talk to others who are in similar situations. And if you talk about these dots, they are there, but they are not very visible. They are over there, and it is possible to find solutions which are not standardized, but which are for the best for everyone. And it seems in the middle of the forest, but the landscape was intentionally created. And another medical facilities example in Belgium. there is quite a large complex of hospitals, and they started modernize and replace the historic buildings with modern buildings. And this is a psychiatric center right now, and one of the buildings they had already started demolishing of the house, and the management of the hospital changed, and the new manager was actually thinking that we need to think over what are we doing. And so once more they involved the patients of this hospital and also their family members and others, and tried to understand what to do. And then architects came up with a solution not to demolish, not to renovate, but to save this building as it is, but add some specific elements, which, for example, you can see that new constructions are strikingly different in order to emphasize the fragility of this house and also how valuable it is in it is fragility, that it doesn't function as it used to before. So these greenhouses, which functionally are intended for creative activities, conversations, where visitors who have come to their relatives and also inhabitants of this center, because there are some people who permanently stay there, so that they can meet there. This is not an inside or outside. This is like a park. You can hide under the roof. You can sit down, talk. These chairs can be moved around. You can sit alone, or you can talk to somebody. And also here is an interesting amphitheater where you can organize some events or various interesting rooms of this type. So what I wanted to emphasize is that here and also in other examples, there was real trying to get in depth of this problem. And there, of course, there were some conversations and discussions, and they were looking for a specific solution for each of them. Another example where is a similar situation, that's from Denmark, and this is disabled people's organizations. That was already spoken and mentioned in another presentation, and this in this organization, this is umbrella organization for 35 organizations for disabled people, and this is like a political also move, because the goal was to improve and increase impact for decision makers, and they decided to build a specific office building. Ambitions were very high to build the most accessible office building in the world. And it was clear that employees of all these societies and organizations had to live there. And most of them, of course, are people with some physical disabilities or mental disabilities, and they had to live there and work there. The research was huge. All the possible solutions were included. The solutions which came to mind of users and also architects, and the planning was according to the regulations and color codes, and all this planning was with like fingers, so it's easier to find yourself, and also it is possible to see through, and also acoustic formats, and then also these very simple solutions, so you can see, you can touch and feel on which floor you are, and so these handles go all around, and there are dots, and dots are when there are doors. And so there are not those disturbing elements on the floor, but they are on these handles. And irrespectively of that, I had a chance to be in this building this summer, and I was able to listen to people, and they said ambitions were high. We've been living here for some time, but if we were doing it now, we would create it much better. So it means we cannot forecast everything. Things change, and we get to the main idea I wanted to emphasize, and I really stand for it, and I consider that we don't need to design for people with special needs. We have to allow people with special needs to design for themselves. We need to have an inclusive society in a sense that we promote inclusion of those people in the architects and designers' jobs. And also that they become a decision makers, so that those people are not just advisors or consultants, but they are doing for themselves. And so it means here, like I said in the beginning, it refers also to the fact that so-called normal people, not all of them are the same, and also participation of women in decision-making, because women have totally different experiences in life in comparison with this 183 meters tall man. So our life is very diverse, and the more we promote that architecture, city planning, design is studied by people who have some mobility issues or other issues, we will increase the possibility that environment that will be designed later will be inclusive, because they will design for themselves, and they with their experience can tell the best what is needed, because I can interpret regulations and I can value according to my experience, but I cannot totally imagine myself and know all the peculiarities those people are feeling and experiencing. And European Disability Forum, their main slogan is that nothing about us without us. And so they have said the same in their slogan. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your philosophy.